Live stream. So Chris, I don't know if I included, but we're probably gonna ask you a little bit about your racing experience too, because that's
Sure.
kind of where it started for you. But let's see. Everybody, welcome. Let me see who's here. There were some people who are very loyal followers, and they just couldn't wait to get this going. They're like, come on. But let's see if I need to pop out the chat because that's the only way I can keep track of it. All right. For those of you watching, we're gonna get started. So we have today. Hi, Matt. Matt's loyal. We have Chris. I'm sorry. Is it Shenfield or Shinfield?
Shenafield.
Shenafield. All right, I like that one. So Chris Shenafield, he is a founder of Redshift Motorsports, and also a very good guy when you're trying to find some parts for your suspension, regardless of what make. Chris, my first interaction with you this year was when I ordered a rear sway bar that I was so desperate to get, and the name Redshift kind of like rung a bell for me. And I'm like, I know this company, but from where? And one of the things, like, it just like a light bulb went off. And we talked about this over email. We have those of us who are running the Merc Racing Supercharger these days have a lot to thank you for, because there's a manifold that you engineered way back in the day when Club RSX was a thing. And so at some point, you and Jose came to an agreement where he would move on from the he would keep the project moving forward for you. So can you tell us about your experience with the supercharger period, the manifold development,
Sure.
and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. This is going back quite a few years, but so when I first started Redshift, we were just a small speed shop in Pennsylvania, and we ended up with a dyno and doing tuning, and got really into that part of speed shop activity, tuning and engine builds. And I think I was taken in that direction with forced induction just because it sort of it fit with something that I found interesting. The sort of physics of it, or the science behind it, I guess. I like, the tuning. I liked, stuffing more air in the engine.
Yeah.
I started getting into combustion analysis, and we were doing pressure analysis in cylinders. And I graduated from RPI. I was a business student, but I had several good engineering friends, including the guy who penned the original engineer behind the manifold. Was not actually me. I was more the idea guy. But a guy named Chris Gruhl, who's a hydraulics, electro-hydraulics engineer for Caterpillar in Peoria, Illinois. And he did this on the side. And he's a guy that had come through engineering school, was very good at using the software. And another guy, I'll throw names out because they are kind of interesting. A guy named, I guess I should be, hopefully they won't mind, a guy named Kevin Colburn, who did some flow analysis stuff, some, what's it called, CFD, computational fluid dynamics stuff. So we were trying our best in creating this manifold, supercharger manifold, to do it right, which was balancing the cylinders, getting the flow right. And so he was in Illinois, I was in Pennsylvania, and we were creating foam models first, and created the first aluminum version of it. It was just a sand cast prototype, and did the machining, all manual machining locally, and put it on the car, and it was phenomenal. Used a twin screw Leischholm. We were really pushing to go ahead with everything. And even so far as went and bought like 20 Leischholm chargers for, a lot of money, and having them shipped from Europe, and et cetera. And at the same time, we were doing, actually, I don't know whether Jose knows this, we were doing turbo development stuff too. And the turbo development, I was working with High Tech. So the guy from High Tech, who's a builds exhausts, headers. He's the header guy. If you know the name High Tech, headers.
That's right. Yeah.
And he does other stuff too, I know. But so he had agreed to do a turbo manifold, and that never panned out. And I was working with Honda R&D on some things, and I was having some sort of personal issues, and ended up deciding I didn't want to continue it. And so it just sort of like it went. It became less the priority, I guess, and I had. I don't know, at some point, Jose and I started talking. I don't know how long after I stopped working on it, Jose and I started talking, but it's sort of like he appeared, and he was really interested in continuing the development of it. And we had done, our first prototype, and, knew there were some sort of fit issues, and some things needed to happen. Some changes needed to happen, and so we came to an agreement that he would take it over. We signed a contract. He, gave me a little bit of money, and so it was all official. And we agreed to do. I and Chris Gruel, the guy who had a lot of sort of software experience and built the manifold, agreed to do, whatever he could to try to. Fix whatever needed to be fixed. And we did some things for a little while. And then eventually Jose took it over and finished it. And I have looked at, I wouldn't say I followed it closely, because it was still several years in development. And, I know there was a lot of work that went into that, because I would say not only is that kind of project difficult, it is, there is not a lot of room in RSX or a Civic or, whatever you're putting it in. Mm-hmm. And trying to do the air-to-air thing, and it was a packaging challenge. So, I applaud him greatly for following through on it and putting it to market, because that was probably very difficult. So
it was. There was so much, man. Talking about alternator differences between cars, and the water pump differences between cars, and the deck height, between K20 and K24, and the fuel rail assembly, but it was fun. I had a lot of fun with it. But go ahead.
Yeah, but the thing that I guess I'm most proud of you know, if you had to ask me what I was proud of, is we put a lot of effort into the flow and balance of the runners. You know, we paid very close attention to that kind of thing. And our manifold just murdered things like the Jackson Racing manifold, and,
right?
Comtech manifold. You know, there's a couple that I remember from them, in terms of flow and its ability to make, you know, real horsepower. So that part, I think, remained as Jose took it on, and I'm sure he had additional work to improve that and the packaging and all the final things to get it to market, which are in some ways more difficult because, you know, when you're dealing with, it's one thing to, you know, to make sure that the thing flows right. It's another thing to make sure it, you know, installs easy and can be worked on easily, and, you know, doesn't have cracking issues, and, you know, manufacturability, and, you know,
right.
Anyway, I know that there's a lot of work there.
Yeah. No, it's right. You're bringing up things that, you know, even I didn't think about. You mentioned the Jackson Racing manifold. You know, I ran that manifold with some of the first aftercoolers that were out there. I ran the light show and blower, and we knew there were limits. We just, you know, I'm not an engineer, and I don't have the mindset of the time that you guys do. So it definitely, you know, you're shining a light on things that, you know, the common person doesn't know.
Well,
so
you know, a lot of people talk about when you are doing forced induction that sort of flow characteristics and the efficiency of the manifolds don't matter as much because all you do is turn the boost up, which is true to a point. But, you know, when you're a Jackson Racing manifold, for example, and you're creating, you know, crazy amounts of what would you call it? Turbulence, I guess, is the right way to
CFM.
put it. You know, your laminar flow is out the window, and your ability to get the air mass in the cylinder is reduced a lot. So what we were trying to do, and what that manifold I think does really well, is it does a better job from the output of the manifold, the output of the supercharger, in sort of collecting the air uniformly and getting it into the cylinders, so that it's more efficient, you know, and you're creating less heat and whatnot.
Okay. And it makes sense to me. If you're tuning and you're applying the same amount of fuel to each cylinder and the same amount of timing to each cylinder, the air should also match up. But
it's easy. Yeah, it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, let me just run these runners." But if, you know, segue into I see some other runners, had they been too far off from each other, you can easily end up feeding too much air to one cylinder, going lean and blowing up a motor real quick.
Yep. All right, Chris. Well, you know, thank you for the detailed background on your history there with the superchargers.
That's a while ago. I'm having a little hard time. That's bringing up some things I haven't thought about for a long time.
Right. I even pulled up some pictures, but I won't pull them up, like the original design. It's amazing what you can still find on Google these days.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
Even though some sites have taken your pictures down, other people have like just reused them.
Well, that original single manifold, I'll tell you this: the prototype cost on that single manifold was about $5,000 for one manifold.
Right.
So if that gives you a sense of the cost of things, it ain't cheap.
So. No, I agree. And
that was just the casting, by the way, not the machining, which was all custom. So yeah.
Right.
Believe me, it was
yeah. All right, so why don't we talk a little bit more about suspensions, which is, you know, a topic that fascinates me
every day now, so I'll be able to do that a little easier.
That's more on the foreground for you, but so you started doing the suspensions, the furthest I look back on your website was what, 2007? You started building your own packages as far, or was it 2013? Why don't you tell us about your suspension?
All right, so let's see. First time I ever really started doing anything with suspensions was in about 1990.
Okay.
And I became an SCCA member, I think in 90 or 91. I had a VW GTI. It was an autocross car. I trailered it, turned into an ITB road race car. And, so I guess that was the beginning of my suspension sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I was at RPI in the mid 90s and part of the Formula Car team. And I started to get really heavily into sort of understanding suspension and suspension design, both from sort of engineering point of view and from a driver's point of view. Why you do what you do and what can you do. And started getting really interested in things like Formula Fords and Continentals, and never owned or drove either of those. I've driven a couple Formula cars, but just in terms of sort of my interest, I became more interested in sort of professional motorsports. And so when I started back in autocross, which is in the late 90s, I had a much more advanced understanding of that. And I built a couple cars, including the white Civic I won nationals with in 2002. That was Jason Tipple's car in 01. I bought it and he had bought another white 02. And then I happened to beat him in 2002 in our two white Civics. But by 2002, I was really starting to get a better understanding of suspension sort of setup, especially with front wheel drive, because that's what I had driven mostly. So I'd driven Formula cars in a BMW, and even went so far as triple adjustables on a 328. And so yeah, by the early 2000s, I was starting to get really into suspensions. And I started, reading. And one of the things that I sort of took away from it, and it still remains true today, is suspension design and handling stuff is, a lot of people think of it as kind of a black art. And it's very hard to find any book or any documentation that says, okay, you need to do this with shocks and this with springs. And, you can find a book, a race car setup book that sort of gives you generalities of things. And there's programs out there that can do really fancy stuff. But if you're the driver in the driver's seat and you want to make your car faster and you want to go fast, kind of more as a fun thing, more as a, my neighbor or you, or, we're not talking about IndyCar drivers and Formula car engineers and stuff. We're talking about normal people. How do we, and there's this real lack of understanding sort of in the market about what made a good suspension, I think, and what made good shocks. And even as recently as maybe 5 years ago or so, and even now, people, with a Civic or BMW or Subaru, whatever it is, they come to me and say, I want conies and ground controls. That's kind of like the thing. Even now, they read on the internet or whatever, I want conies and ground controls. And there is a huge difference between the Coney ground control thing, which is, $1,000, $1,500 or something, and some of the really good stuff like the motion control JRZ, Moton side of things. Different strategy, damping strategy. So from 2002, as I was developing, because in 2002 when I won nationals, it was using Coney Sports. It was like Coney street shocks and ground controls with not particularly high spring rates. and from 2002, when I started Redshift, and I, starting it with, one employee, and then we had, 2 and 3 and 5 and 7, and a 4-wheel drive dyno and trailer, and, things got kind of out of hand. Not out of hand, I shouldn't say it that way, but in hindsight, it got a little bit crazy. And it's like I sort of came back to the thing, the suspension thing, because it's the one thing that seemed like it was a void that really needed to be filled. There's generally, if you talk to a guy down the road about putting cams in or putting the turbo on, like there's a kind of a decent understanding of that. Not perfect, but you're putting, you're boosting the car, you're making more power. People talk about, ignition timing and whatnot. But you say to somebody, hey, what shocks do you have on the car and why? And people don't know. They don't understand. So that's why I decided that was something I needed to do. So the racing thing and me as a driver and learning the engineering side of things kind of came together here in the last 5 or 10 years after the supercharger thing went to Jose, where I just sort of ended back in doing the suspension thing. And then, let's see, that's another interesting point. So, yeah, so I'll speak freely about something that's, some things I don't know whether I should talk about, and some things, but things that are interesting aren't always appealing to everybody or
well, I'll tell you this,
everybody.
Everyone following along, I mean, I have a few guys that are keenly interested in just the science behind it. I think a lot of the guys that follow my channel and follow Jose, some may not have experienced quite as much as you and Jose, but go as deep as you feel like it, or back it up as much as you want. Whether they like it or not, I really don't care.
Well, there's I'll explain how I got to where I am. I think that's with suspension theory and why I do what I do. So I was a big Coney seller for a long time, and I still like Coney. They used to be much more involved and have their own shop, much more involved in racing. Man, I gotta give big props to a guy named Lee Grimes. Lee Grimes is a guy, and a lot of people probably know him as CRX Lee, or if they've been on the forums. He's a Coney guy, one of the lead guys in sort of product development and racing side. He's been racing his own car for a long time. Really good guy, really knowledgeable guy. That's the guy that got me started in suspension stuff. And I remember and he was always, I was a nobody, and he was always so nice to me and would, talk to me about stuff. So I really appreciated that from him. So I was a big fan of Coney, and, Coney is the original adjustable shock, whereas Bilstein is the original monotube shock. The Coney's, as I understand it, that adjustable shock that twin tube shock is the same shock technology is used on a lot of professional race cars from the 60s. It goes way back to that time. And so the Coney Yellow or Coney Sport that you buy today is actually in no small part to racing development in the 60s. But the guy who at the time was the motorsports manager, or the guy leading the charge with motorsports at Coney, and this is, I think most of what I'm going to mention here is from a book that he wrote. This guy's name is Jan Zujic, and he was at Coney. And as I understand it, I think this is from that book that I read of his. He decided he wanted to leave Coney. I'm not sure why he left Coney. I think it was partly because he didn't agree so much with what Coney was doing. Coney wanted to keep things comfortable, and their strategy and their sense of things, maybe as a company or other people within that company, did not want to push the motorsports thing that Jan wanted to do, which was what he did when he went to JRZ, or when he started JRZ. So JRZ is a company founded by 3 people. Jan Zujic is one of them. I think he's the Z. There's another guy named Jerome Van Gool. He's the J, I think. I think he's the J. I don't know who the other guy is, but JRZ was sort of an offshoot of Coney mostly, I would say, and maybe the other guy, Jerome Van Gool, had a lot to do with it. But I think that Jan Zujic, he was maybe considered one of the top motorsports shock engineers at the time. So he left. He and 2 other guys, including Jerome Van Gool, which he will come up again as I'm explaining this, started this company and started to push the motorsports thing more. He started doing things like, what he wanted to do. And he tested and he tested and he tested and he tested. And he has stories about how, he would be invited to a race team and he would change from his old strategy to his new strategy, kind of like the current way of doing things to what he thought should be done. And as he kind of like turned the knobs, and I say knobs, but things like changing shaft sizes and increasing pressures and going to monotube, and as he started making these adjustments, the cars got faster and faster and faster and faster. And soon JRZ was literally leaving Coney behind with the whole motorsports thing. Now, Coney does do some motorsport stuff, or they did anyway, the 28 series, the 30 series, they have the monotube, but they are really more known for the twin tube and not so much for the monotube sort of motorsport stuff. So JRZ became the big, professional motorsports shop company. And there was a point where, I don't know, I can't remember what happened to JRZ, but JRZ, I think 1 or 2 people left. Maybe Jan Zujic stayed there, but I know Jerome Van Gool left and started a company you may have heard of called Moton. And so Coney, Jan Zujic left Coney, started JRZ. One of the JRZ guys left, started Moton. And then Moton went bankrupt. It was about, 7, 8, 10 years ago, and was bought by AST. And Jerome Van Gool left there and started Motion Control. And so these companies all have very, they're associated with one another, kind of. And you can follow the progression of motorsports shock design if you go from Coney to JRZ to Moton to MCS, or Motion Control. So that's, and essentially that's kind of the path I followed as well. So I was a Coney guy, and then I got into the JRZ thing because that was better. Once I sort of understood what was going on, I did the triple adjustable JRZs on the BMW, and was, playing around with things and starting to understand. But the whole time I was doing Coney, because Coney was still considered the best street shock out there. And still a lot of guys would run Coney ground control on their on their fun, their weekend racers, so so in the last 5 or 7 years, I've been very interested in the fact that there are these monotube companies out there, like the Taiwanese, the first one being Borchuan, which is BC Racing. That's the company that started everything in Taiwan anyway. That's the original damper company there. And as I understand it, I think an offshoot of them was D2, and it was actually a part of them for a while and then got sold. So it's now a different company now, but BC also makes, I mean, BC and D2 make a lot of private label things for people. And then, you know, there's stuff made in China, and there's all, you know, the wide range of quality there. But the original one is Borchuan, which is BC, not to be confused with Buddy Club, not the same company. Buddy Club is kind of like a Skunk 2 of Japan, and they make you know, everything from radiator caps to, you know, to shocks to you know, exhausts. So they're not a suspension company. Skunk 2 is not a suspension company. Borchuan BC Racing is a suspension company. And interestingly, about the time that I started Redshift, the guy who, I think so, about the time I was starting Redshift, was about the time the guy who started BC Racing North America started his business. And it was out of his garage in Florida, I think. And he has created BC Racing North America. He has created this North American company that has this huge range of coilovers. And, you know, a lot of the engineering is done in Taiwan, and a lot of it is done here. You know, it's mutual effort, I guess. And I 4 years ago, maybe, I guess it is now, was the very first time I bought one of them. And it was when I was buying a whole bunch of coilovers. So to back up 1 second, Coney was starting to piss me off. There, I said it. So I was still in business. Coney stopped seeming to care about me. I was a small guy, but I was, you know, I was doing enough business. They should have cared. They should have been interested in me, but they were more interested in, you know, the big sellers than to a small guy like myself. And so I started having a harder and harder time making money off of Coney. And it got so bad at one point, I decided I needed to try to find an alternative. And it was, you know, it was me in my desk chair sitting here going, what am I gonna do? Like, you know, I can't make, you know, $15 a shock on Coney and stay in business, and I won't do it. I'm not interested in that. You know, we still have to put food on our table. We don't do it for, you know, just the fun of it, because we wouldn't be able to do it for that long. And so I bought probably 15 different coilover kits, and I started testing things. And I bought the dyno, and I started doing this sort of like, you know, test thing. And I started posting things. And the list of the things that I tested were just basically everything you could think of, I tested. Everything from True Heart to Skunk 2 to Moton to Jersey to BC Racing to D2 to Tane, different Tanes, Raceland, which people are like, oh, you don't need to test that. And I'm like, no, I want to understand what this thing is. And the only two, I'll tell you this, the only two companies that I actually had failures that caused, during testing, I had actual failures, three. I had failures on 3 brands. True Heart, where I had spring deform and not come back to normal height. Hold on. The hell were they? True Heart. Oh, Buddy Club. This is why I don't sell Buddy Club. Buddy Club, I had a crack develop on the top of one of the shock shafts, a legitimate crack. And I was a Buddy Club dealer, and I sent them pictures. I emailed, and they ignored me, and they ignored me, and they ignored me. And I said, F you. I'm never selling any of your stuff ever again. It was like a, you know, if you can't treat somebody that's trying to understand what your shocks are doing, how are you going to treat somebody that doesn't understand what's going on? You know, and I don't know what other experience anybody else has had with Buddy Club.
Could I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before I got into racing or autocross, I mean, I did mostly autocrossing. You know, I was a typical guy. You know, we had one store, Club RSX, and, you know, they had everything. But, you know, everyone's like, you know, get the Buddy Club kit. They're really nice. So I got the first, like the entry level one, the street sporty model one. And then I got into autocross. They were terrible. Just, you know, there were guys who didn't know what I had a 600 wheel horsepower RSX trying to push around a parking lot or airstrip. And guys were like, hey, you know, you really have to adjust your suspension. You know, either, you know, set different preloads, and I tried everything. And then I got the mid-grade Buddy Club, which I forgot what it was. And then eventually I ended up going to the race spec. And you're right. You know, eventually I called their customer service line. I said, you know, do you guys have anything that we could do here? You know, whether we can revolve them, whether we could, do you have heavier springs? And they basically said, you know, sorry, no, you know. And
so the thing is, yeah,
that was tough. That was tough to find out you spend all this money and you did it wrong 3 times, basically.
Yeah, and I should that's part of what I need to explain. And I'm sorry if I'm droning on here, but one of the things I wanted to say is that preload is not a tuning tool. I don't know where that came from on the internet, but it's not correct. And there's a very simple explanation that I give to people, which is, if you preload the springs, right? You preload them a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. Once you set the car on the ground, the preload doesn't matter. So if you when you set the car on the ground, the spring is going to compress a certain amount because it's got a pound per inch. So that corner is going to compress a certain amount. If you preload it, that means that's as far as the shock can extend itself, right? So if you preload any more than you have to, all you're doing is reducing the droop travel, which is a huge no-no.
Yeah.
So the bottom line with preload as little as you have to. The whole point is just to hold the spring in place, and then don't do any more. So anyway,
I read into that recently. I have,
and it's true.
The suspension
once
I have
the car's
recently,
on the ground, who cares what the preload was? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it does not affect the handling of the car. I mean, it could, for the worse, you know, if it's too far in one direction or the other, I suppose. But yeah.
Right. All right. So let's keep going with the story, because things just got juicy.
Yeah, and let me. Yeah, no, I know we're pretty far through this already, and I have
good.
Yeah, but okay. So here's the thing. Coney. One of the things that they did is they don't. Coney sports don't produce a lot of compression. So you have compression and rebound on a damper. And it's not a dampener, by the way, it's a damper. A dampener makes things wet, or they use that in acoustics. A damper is a shock. And Coney used very little compression and a ton of rebound. And they did that for comfort reasons. And it makes a lot of sense. So no matter what spring is on the car, you have a lot of rebound, you can control the spring, but you're not, with the compression being very, very low, and we're talking 50 pounds of compression force or so, maybe 75, you're not creating a lot of impact for a street guy. So street guys are relatively comfortable. That was their goal. That's the thing that Jan Zujic didn't like, I guess. So as you go through JRZ, Moton, and MCS, one of the things that was discovered in motorsports is that you need to increase compression. And if you change the balance of the shock more toward compression, then you increase grip. And you can do other things like, going with a larger shaft and higher gas pressure internally. Although that has its downside maybe a little bit too, but there's other things that can be done. But the main thing is that changing the compression to rebound ratio, and also the curves are a little bit, you want, generally, it helps to be a little more digressive than Koni is, or most street shocks are on the compression side, and more linear on the rebound side if you're running sort of mod level, like higher spring rates. When you're running more stock or softer spring rates, there is some advantage to having more digressive, higher rebound for controlling the car. And it changes between front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, and all wheel drive. A lot of all wheel drives are very similar to front wheel drive. Some are very different. Some are more like, rear wheel drive. But it's important to understand, what's the driver doing, or what's, what kind of car is it, and how does that car handle? And even things like limited slip choice, whether you're running a torsion or a clutch style, can have some effect on how you might set the car up. But the 30,000 foot view point I'm trying to make is that one of the big departures from Koni to JRZ Moton and motion control through there is that, and actually went from Koni to JRZ was where the main step happened, was this move toward more compression. And so here's the problem. It seems like, most all of the less expensive coilovers out there have tended to follow Koni's lead, and for good reason. There's a reason why the Konis have sold well. There's a reason why people love them. They're comfortable on the street, where most of these cars are driven most of the time. And the thing is, Koni uses a different kind of adjuster. They use a spring tension adjuster, which increases spring tension on the rebound shim stack, which has a little bit different characteristic through its adjustment range. Actually, not a little bit, a significantly different adjustment, a different sort of dynamic through its adjustment range than most of the coilovers like Buddy Club or BC, or most of the ones you see. So, and I'll explain it this way. There was one competitor back when I started to the Konis, and that was Tokiko Lumina, Tokiko HTS, I think they called it for a while. And the main difference was between the Illumina and the Koni is the Koni was rebound adjustable only, and the Tokiko was adjust both compression and rebound together. And it did it with a simple bleed adjustment. So it had a knob on the top, and it had like a pintle valve kind of setup where it had one big valve that would go stop, basically plug the hole. And then as you open it up, it was a threaded rod that would basically back out of the hole. And that valve would allow fluid to go around the piston without going through the shims. Okay, so essentially what they were doing is they would set the valving on this shock with the adjuster set to full stiff, and they would tune it that way, but knowing that basically every Koni Illumina out there, as you adjusted it, was simply opening up this bleed hole, and would take whatever you were doing and or however you had it set, and basically soften it. So whereas Koni might have had different springs and different shims, and it was a preload on a shim stack. Tokiko throughout their entire line, as far as I could tell, had one size hole, maybe two size holes, and it would just open up a bleed valve, and there was sort of a more sort of generic sort of adjustment range for that. That Tokiko style of adjuster is the same adjuster in all of, as far as I know, most you can consider basically all less expensive coilovers and shocks. So BC, all the ones I named before, BC Skunk 2, Tane, Raceland, anything that's a monotube, less expensive coilover under about $3,000 has a bleed valve. AST has a bleed valve. Now, so do JRZ Moton and MCS, but theirs is much, at least I know Motion Controls and Motons to a degree too, much more sophisticated. So whereas all the less expensive coilovers, and AST is an interesting example because it's AST Moton, right? So AST is the less expensive line, Moton is the more expensive line. And AST uses this less expensive kind of adjuster, just one big bleed hole. BC uses it, everybody uses it, okay? So the problem with that is, again, no matter how you adjust the shock, or how you tune the shock, when it's at full soft, they're all so similar. And all of these shock companies follow Koni's lead mostly, in that they run very low compression, very high rebound. So at full stiff, they're very low rebound, very low compression, and very high rebound. And as you soften it, the very low rebound gets even less, and the very high rebound gets a little more linear, meaning it's less digressive and becomes a little more linear, because the sort of handling area of the shock, which is low speed, 1 to 3, 4, 5 inches per second, is basically determined by the bleed valve, not by the shim stack. And so actually, most of these shocks actually are not necessarily better handling as you get them to full stiff. And you may have experienced this, Barry, with the buddy clubs, is as you turn them up to full stiff, they almost got harder to drive, right?
Yeah.
They get so stiff, they start exhibiting bouncing and
right.
Stuff like that. So here's the thing, and this is where I had kind of a sort of this moment of like, I got to get away from Koni, sort of as my main thrust. Now I was opening up Konis, I was trying to figure out how to revalve them, and I was having trouble with them. And anyway, so I started looking around, and through all of the coilovers that I found, the ones that I liked the best were two, Skunk 2 and BC Racing. And all the other ones are good, like the Tames are good. That's a good company. What other ones are good? Well, there's other good ones. There's one that's aren't so good. I don't like the True Hearts. The Racelands are garbage. Even though they're very comfortable, they're garbage.
In the competitive field, because we're mostly focusing on, someone who wants to be somewhat highly competitive.
Okay.
When they take their car to.
Yeah. So here's the sort of, let me move in that direction. So, the low cost solution in motorsports to get a really good sort of motorsport level damper, but for not much money, was with Bilsteins. Okay, so people would have their Bilsteins, revalved, and they and Bilstein's great shock, monotube shock, lots of different options, but for most street cars, not so much availability, right? So they're big into German. There's a German company, right? So Bilstein. And so you can, if you're a VW guy, you can get some stuff, or Audi or BMW guy. But I came from I started out as a VW guy actually, but I was doing a lot of Honda stuff and more sort of Asian Japanese stuff. And there has never really been that much Bilstein availability. So you can still go buy Bilstein shocks and make them work on anything. And they sold inserts and things that were workable. But at the end of the day, most of the time, those were still non-adjustable, most of them. So here was the problem. If you wanted to race your car, if you're an autocrosser or a weekend track guy, and you wanted something really, really good, you could put these Bilsteins on your car, and they were as good as anything else out there. But then you killed yourself going to and from the track, right? So part of what I was doing in all this was trying to find a way of applying really good motorsport damping strategy to the daily driver, the guy that wanted to be able to drive his car to work during the week and, you know, autocross on the weekends. And so the long and short of it is that BC Racing fit that best. And the reason they fit that best was for a couple of reasons. One is they're very high quality. Now, there are people out there that say they're junk. They're not junk. They're the people, I think most of them who call them junk because they're trying to do something with them they're not really meant for.
Right.
Which is going to the track. I mean, they can go to the track, but if you're really serious about going to the track and you're running, you know, like 150 miles an hour at, you know, Road America or something, you know, and especially
you're going to get into
aero
some trouble.
and you're running race tires and, you know, they're just not enough, and big tires. So, essentially what I've done, and because it's BC Racing and I have a relationship with them and they're working with me to, you know, sort of allow me to do all sorts of, you know, custom things, is I can build a BC Racing kit that has the same dimensions as a Bilstein. You can even put a Bilstein piston in a BC Racing shock. So they have a, you know, 46 millimeter OD piston with a 12 millimeter ID inner diameter. And I started off actually by putting the Bilstein piston in the BC Racing coilover. But okay, and this was sort of this moment of clarity for me where I realized that the BC Racing shock at full stiff was simply the same thing as a Bilstein shock. Think about it. You close the bleed valve, it's the same thing as an inexpensive Bilstein shock. The difference is that you now have the ability to open the bleed valve. So now what happens when you open the bleed valve, sort of a different story. And that's, you know, another part of the strategy that actually works pretty well. And it's really what makes the Revalve BC not as good as the really high dollar stuff, because they use very fancy adjusters that you know, keep the shape of the curve where they want it through its entire range. But here's what happened. We, you know, say we on a front wheel drive Mazda, you know, Mazda Speed Protege. I'll just use that as an example, okay? Where we want to run a lot of, let's talk about the front. We want to run a lot of compression, maybe 200 pounds of compression, which is more than double what just about any other inexpensive coilover out there makes at full stiff. So we're running a lot more compression, and at full stiff, we're also running less rebound. And it's no longer from a graph point of view, it's no longer like a very digressive, which is like Coney and everybody else. They make it quite digressive at full stiff. So you're running, you know, a stock inexpensive coilover at full stiff is making, you know, 500 pounds of rebound force at 2 inches per second, which is insanity for a track car, I think. So instead of running digressive, we run it more linear, which means in low speed, it's making a heck of a lot less rebound. So what ends up happening is you end up controlling the mass of the car. The sort of dynamics of the car are controlled more on the compression side than the rebound side. And that does a number of things. And again, this is the strategy that all the expensive motorsport shock companies use, essentially, is you control the mass of the car more with compression than rebound, as compared to street shocks, I'll call them. Street shocks meaning Coney Sport and all the, you know, the street coilovers on the market. And you're running less rebound, which means the tire is staying in contact with the road better over undulations, over bumps. because as you can imagine, you know, if you're on a bumpy lot, you come over a bump on the backside of the bump, you want the tire to follow the backside of the bump. If you have a lot of compression, it's not going to follow the backside of the bump. The car's going to kind of come crashing down on the backside of the bump, and you can get kind of a hopping thing and hopping thing at worst. But you know, at best, what you get is a very sort of how do I want to put it? A nervous car. So if you're high on rebound, you know, imagine you're doing 100 miles an hour into you know, Lime Rock turn 1, for example. You know,
I'm going
that's
there.
bumpy. Okay.
I'm going there next month.
It's bumpy. So you go into it braking hard. On your street coilovers, you've got very little compression, but you have them turned up because you need some kind of control. And what ends up happening is you end up sort of chattering the tire, and that, you know, that extends your braking distance and makes you kind of wash out. Whereas the guy with the well-tuned, you know, race shocks behind you is going to be able to just stuff it down right in front of you, and be under control doing it, where you're out there like trying to stay out of the grass. Right. And that's kind of a dramatic way of saying it, but that's the reality.
I've had that similar issue in autocross where I've gone back now and watched some of my old videos. And I might post some of them here, and I'm watching the asset of the car just sort of doing this and just taking a very long time to sort of settle down, or washing out the front end. I'm just like, why did I not notice that before with my very own eyes? You know, I'm watching the fast guys out there. They look flat. They look flat around the corners.
Yeah.
But this is kind of what has intrigued me recently, and you know, I've gone ahead and, you know, right now, you know, I think Han, Signal Evolve here, myself, we're running Godspeed project, which I don't know do you have any experience?
Oh yeah, I tested them too. I like Godspeed, but again, they're not a suspension company. So
yeah, I went with them because of the monotube thing. Yeah, I was looking for monotube because of my past history with Buddy Club and twin tube stuff, and I'm sorry to break in on here, but we got to an interesting point, and I guess what I'm trying to do to make up for the bad dampers is throw in a better spring around them, which isn't the right thing, I think, overall. Not the right especially thing. If there's
it helps.
You know, it helps. So with the little testing I've done, it's helped, but I do know that I need to head into a direction similar to what, you know, your products can, you know, provide to someone like me.
So the thing and I'll cut in there, because the right way to set the car up is with as little spring rate as possible, generally. Mm-hmm. So by increasing spring rate, you're sort of putting a Band-Aid on something. But what happens is the higher spring rate helps sort of balance out the fact that it's got no compression and tons of rebound. So it helps, but it's still not the right way to do it.
Yeah, I've accepted that.
If you're going to do it right, do it right, which is you can run less spring rate and the right damping and be faster. So, you know, why not do it the right way?
Right. Yeah, no, again, like I just said, let me experiment with this. And knowing that this is I'm going to spend a very short period of time on this kind of setup. Yeah. I felt as soon as I threw in, I bought the Godspeed coilover, and everyone says good things. They are a monotube and everything, but as soon as they put them on the car, I'm like, this car just feels almost worse in some ways than my stock suspension. In many ways better, but in some ways, I mean, so
and that's the hard. So here's the thing: what you're saying is exactly the point I was making when we first started talking, which is the sort of sense that, hey, I'm putting a suspension that's supposed to make the car better, and it doesn't feel right, but I don't really understand why. So I start trying to make it better, but there is, And what book do you read to tell you what to do? That's the thing. There's so little information out there about the right way to do things. And that's part of the problem is if you're going to put a turbo on a car, there's a lot of information. You can kind of understand it. But when you go to suspension stuff, there's so many things that work. And it's not just the spring rate. Sorry, I have a bug flying. It's not just the spring rates. It's not just the damping. It's how you align the car and how you set the car up, how you drive it, how do you have enough experience to be able to push the car and understand that something is not right? So that's the dilemma that people have, I think.
I think Jose wants to chime in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Chris, one thing I would like for you to add to that is the people complain about the lean on a car. And if you don't mind sharing with us, what a good lean is, lean like swaying the car a little bit versus being too stiff because you want to feel on rails. Many kids confuse that. Yeah.
That's a very difficult question to answer.
I'll go general. Yeah, go general.
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult question to answer. Even if you had a formula car and all the adjustments in the world, and you could measure roll centers and things like that, and centers of gravity, and you could tune the heck out of the car. It's still it's still something that teams of people strive to develop a single car in a year, right? So if you're an F1 team, there's like a suspension team and a couple drivers, and this is not easy stuff. When you apply it to a street car, which has basically a suspension that the accounting department allowed to be on the car in a way, not all of them, but you have struts on the front of your car. It's very hard to explain that kind of thing. And I'll give you an example why. On a lot of strut cars, when you lower the car, the center of gravity, you lower the car an inch, the center of the gravity in the front of the car goes down an inch, right? Okay. But the roll center goes down more than an inch. And how much the car rolls has to do with the distance between the roll center and the center of gravity. So now you've just made the car roll more, even though you've lowered it. It's why I don't lower the front of on a strut car. I tend not to slam the front of my car. And it's not that I've done a ton of testing, but I just know inherently that the strut car doesn't like to be lowered any more than it has to. And I have to admit, I've poured over formulas and trying to understand this stuff. I mean, there's volumes of suspension theory and software packages that tell you all this stuff. At the end of the day, though, I come at this more from the driver's point of view, which is I understand 80% of it. Or I shouldn't say I understand 80%. I understand 1,000 times more than most people do, but I still only understand 80% of what the professional guys understand. And I understand enough to know that 80% gets you 95% of the way there in terms of setting the car up correctly. And that is to say, be smart about how you do it and don't do anything stupid. So when you say how much roll is the right amount of roll, that's maybe not the right question to ask. The question to ask is, how comfortable do you want to be? Because if you say to me, I don't care about being comfortable, well, then we'll make the car not roll very much. But generally you do it, do you do it with sway bars and springs? How much do you try to do with shocks? How much transition is in the racing that you do? What sort of tires are you running? How much,
tire pressure.
Even once you kind of let 20% of that very difficult stuff to apply, slide away, and you just try to do the simple stuff, it's still a very difficult thing to say, this is what you should do. What I'll try to say, I'll try to answer the question, but knowing what I just said, how much is the right amount of sway? Boy, as soon as, when you ask that, I start thinking about all the other things that go into it. And it's, what's that? I couldn't hear you, Jose.
It is. Oh,
You're
sorry. Without going on a rabbit hole, here's what can help you answer that. Most people, our audience, drive some street tires, and we know we don't want to overload them and create understeer, for example. That might help direct it.
Okay. So the answer to that question is there are two things you need to consider. One is a steady state balance of the car, and then the other is the sort of transitional characteristic of the car. Those are two different things, right? The right way to develop a car first is from soft to stiff. So you start soft so you can feel what the car is doing. So generally when people buy stuff from me, I say start with, don't go crazy with right to the stiff springs. They can make things difficult to develop. But basically you start with a setup that is steady state capable, meaning what does the car do in a steady state term? Okay. Most amateur guys, maybe a lot of people that are listening or will listen, tend to set the car up too pushy. What you need to be able to do is be comfortable at the limit of the car. And a lot of times what that means is being comfortable with the rear of the car at the absolute limit. Because the rear of the car being at the limit is where the back of the car is moving laterally, helping you turn. So if we're talking about a front wheel drive car, I don't know what, we could talk about front wheel drive because that's
we'll stick to front wheel. Yeah.
Okay. So front or a lot of all wheel drive like WRXs that have a lot of viscous limited slips in them. I think the middle one is viscous, I think. So it basically acts like a front wheel drive car. There's front tires and rear tires, and there are two things in getting through a corner. The first is getting the car to change direction, right? So if you're trying to turn right, you're trying to get the mass of the car starting to accelerate toward the right. Think about it in terms of acceleration, maybe it can help, because that's what you're not on the gas, but with your steering wheel. And your car can accelerate a lot faster steering in a direction than it can accelerating in a direction. So you want to be able to enter a turn fast and do an input to the steering wheel that gets the car moving in that direction. But as part of that is getting the car to rotate. So the only way you get the car to actually go right is with the steering wheel, but also with rotation of the car. And if you're not comfortable with the rear tires being at the limit, you can't get the car to rotate as well as the guy that is comfortable being at the limit in the back. And the way that you do that, because maybe people out there are thinking, yeah, but I've spun my car. Okay, well, you need to set the car up so that it won't spin so easily, which tends to be more toe out, more camber in the rear, so that you can basically throw the car into the turn, and instead of the thing just snap spinning out of control, don't set high rear tire pressures. It's another internet mistake. And I know a lot of guys do it and they claim it's okay. It's my very strong opinion, it's the wrong thing to do. Go lower in the rear tire, lower pressure in the rear tire, makes them softer, increases their slip angle, which is like dynamic toe out. You go into a turn, the softer tire helps get the back of the car turned, especially early in the turn. And as you learn to drive the car fast and at the limit, where you really feel the back of the car, but you get comfortable with the back of the car and confident with the back of the car. The sort of more towed out, higher camber settings will make you way faster than if you just leave the stock settings on the back of the car. So that's a very, for any car, like I drove a Z06 C7 supercharged Corvette a couple years ago, 750 horsepower, and it has funky camber curves in the back, bump steer curves, but we were pushing the toe out, trying to get, and that's a high horsepower rear wheel drive car, but it was in autocross, and you got to make the car handle first. So if you have 100 horsepower, if you have 750 horsepower, you've got to get comfortable with the back of the car helping you steer. So that's the long answer to why my car is pushing really bad. I can't get the car to turn. Is once you get the back doing what it needs to do, you take a lot of the strain off the front tires, and all the push magically goes away.
Right. Wow.
So, and shocks have something to do with that. Spring rates have something to do with that. There are very successful people in racing that run, I'll say because I know this for a fact, SMF or STS guys running Civics. There are people that are running higher front spring rates than rear spring rates. And then there are guys running higher rear rates than front rates, right?
I think that's a traditional school of thought, at least on the internet, and even my local club here, they think I'm nuts for going so high in the back, but primarily high rear, low in the front end. That's kind of the school of thought, at least with the clubs I run with.
Now, when you say high in the back, what kind of car are we
talking
about?
Higher, like just a Honda Civic or RSX, higher spring rate in the rear and
higher in the back than in the front, right?
Yeah.
So that for me anyway, that dates back to Lee Grimes of Coney. That's what he ran on his CRX back in the day. We're talking 20 plus years ago.
All right.
They ran what was called street prepared showroom stock with a CRX.
Mm-hmm.
And those became the race Coneys, the SPSS race Coneys, street prepared showroom stock. Date from when he did that racing, and he ran, I don't remember exactly what he ran, something like, I can't remember, 500, 700. I don't remember exactly, but it was more in the back than in the front, if I'm remembering myself correctly. But you got a guy like, a guy that won nationals in an SMF car. Now that's a little different. Those are huge front tires and smaller rear tires with big horsepower. But guys running over 1,000-pound front springs and 400-pound rear springs in an SMF car.
Wow.
Or there's successful STS guys in running EF hatches with higher front spring rates and lower rear with a big bar. There's not a wrong way of doing it, really. A lot depends on the shocks you're running too. And again, a lot of this, what spring rates people do is to band-aid the shock. So, a lot of guys are running higher rear spring rates because they're trying to get the back of the car moving laterally to help them turn. And the only way that they can do that, because their shocks don't help them, is with spring rate. So if you ran, for example, 700 front, 600 rear on a Civic in STS, okay, that's simple formula. You're running higher in the front than in the back, but if you're towed out, big sway bar, correct shocks, it will drive just like the car running 500 front, 700 rear on Coney race shocks, twin tube race shocks, because of how the shocks work. It's all interrelated, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, really. And that's part of if you're looking for a book to tell you what to do, that's part of the issue. Is it's like, what's a good example? How to make chicken noodle soup, something basic like that. There's 10 different ways to make chicken noodle soup, right? It always comes out the same. Or a lot of times it would come out the same. It's a similar kind of thing. There are lots of tools on the car to do what you need to do. And, you as a driver need to understand them so that when you go to the event, you can make whatever tweak you need to make the car fast. I mean, I'm one to make rear toe adjustments between runs, because I used to change tire pressure, but I tended to, and I still do change tire pressure, but when you're trying to make bigger changes, better way of doing it to get the car, the rotation of the car, what it needs to be. And generally on a front wheel drive car, all wheel drive car, grippier surfaces tend to make the car understeer more because the lighter end of the car gains more grip than the front, relatively. So if you go to a concrete site, the car will tend to understeer more. You've got to be able to react to that. Or if it rains, or if it's hot, or even going from run one to run 3, there's a sort of an adjustment in how the car works where you don't have much heat in any of the tires on the first run. On the second run, you got heat in the front, but not the back. And by the third run, the rear tires are starting to get sticky, and then the car wants to push. And you've got to anticipate all this stuff. Or, how many times have you done third run and it was slower than the second run? The car didn't feel as good, right?
Right, more pushing.
These kinds of things sort of evolve through these runs.
Yeah.
And the thing about, so if you do a lot of rear toe with a lot of camber and you're confident in the back of the car, it's a recipe for somebody who doesn't understand the car to get in it and spin it. So, it's that kind of setup can make the car feel scary at first. So your first run, you've got to run without spinning the car.
Yeah.
But once you get heat in the rear tire and you start to be able to lean on them, that's when the car will start getting really, really fast. And you've got to, so you want to be fast. An autocross car that's fast in the slow sections is the one that will win more often than not.
Right.
So it's not, your gauge of how fast the run is not how much fire was coming off your hair in the fast section. It's how cleanly you get through the slow section that matters more. The slow and the medium speed stuff.
Got it. No, it makes sense. You hear this all the time. You go into an autocross event. If you're a new guy, it's logic's like slow in, fast out.
Yep.
Being smooth rather than. I remember. So I went from a 600 whatever, so from a high horsepower RSX running SMF.
Yep.
And to the following year, I said, I still want a car with torque and power, so I got a Camaro 1 LE SS.
Yeah, RSX is a terrible handling car, by the way. You're jaded.
Yes.
Your car will never handle well, just so you know.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of I think Jose brought this point up. He drove, I think, an 8th gen around the same time when they first came out, and he said, "Wow, this suspension geometry of this car was so much better." So I'm gonna try to let's move on to that. Why?
Okay.
What changes did Honda make to the 8th and 9th gens that made them so much better than the RSX or the EP3?
Okay. Yeah. So the RSX has very little caster in front, and it's got steering arms that aren't long enough. So when you start running out of steering arm, wait, if I'm remembering this correctly, hold on. It's been a while since I've thought about this. The front is not as much of a problem, but it's a little bit of a problem. The rear is the one that's really horrible. All sorts of weird bump steer stuff going on. And generally, you see this in all road racing and autocrossing. Basically, an RSX is best when the suspension doesn't move at all, especially the back. That's why you got guys running RSXs successfully running, 2,000 pound or 1,800 pound rear springs, because they're trying to get the car not to move in the back, or maybe even a 2,400. I forget.
I know a guy. I know a guy who ran 2,500.
2,500. Okay, so
he's here.
Actually, Jose, you had an RSX for a while, right?
He still does.
I see you smiling. You're in the dark there, but I see your
I do. I'm one of those crazy ones with 2,500 springs in the rear.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
So, no, that's the RSX is a special case. Anybody that ever contacts me with an EP3 or any kind of 7th gen Civic or RSX, it's immediately kind of like, okay, well, what are you trying to do to the car? If they say, well, I just want to have a fun street car, fine. But I want to make it, I want to make it really fast. And, I'm like, okay, so first of all, the car sucks handling wise, unless you make it not drivable on the street, essentially. It's if you want to make it fast on the track, you cannot drive it on the street. End of story.
I can't. I remember when I was still street driving the car and racing at the same time. I was on my way to the Redshift Motorsports Park, and I have my 2,500 springs in the rear. And I go to very early in the morning. I need a coffee, so I bought one of those bottled coffee, right? And I go over a hump in a bridge. My entire bottle emptied out when I went over that bump.
Oh my God! Really?
The cup just went.
Yeah.
The whole car.
So, that's how stiff the car was. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to have fun in anything handling related in motorsports, the RSX and 7th gen Civic is not the answer.
Yeah.
Drag racing, okay. A fun weekend car, okay. Like if you just want to do track days and stuff, it's a great car just to sort of have fun with. But
and on the brochure of that car, it said it had the same handling.
The what?
On the brochure of that car, it said it had the same handling characteristics of a BMW 3 Series.
Yeah, that's the marketing department.
I'm like, but that's I bought it. I bought it.
I'll throw another name out there. I was only there a couple of years, but I used to work for Honda R&D in their development department. And my cars were the MDX and the 2-door Accord. And I was there right when I was leaving. The 7th gen Civic was just showing up, and the BMW 3 something was one of the cars that they used to compare it, I think, to the Civic. So their marketing department. I'm never going to have a job at Honda ever again. So they tend to frown on people talking about what goes on there, but
right.
Honda is a fantastic company, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking smack on them, but they still have a marketing department.
Oh, yeah. They have to sell
it. And a lot of engineers didn't like the 7th gen Civic because the 6th gen Civic was so good. The 6th and the 5th and the 4th were so good.
With the double wishbone suspension. Someone asked about that. Was there a challenge going from double wishbone to, like a strut style suspension? Like
it was an accounting decision. I know.
Okay.
The reason they did that is because the double wishbone was more expensive and they would make more on the car. You could sell it for less. That's the only reason.
Wow.
And that's the answer you don't want to hear from Honda, but that's the reason.
Yeah.
I mean, the Civic is their commuter car. It's the one they make most of their money off of.
Right.
And that's the one that, it's got to be right. And the other cars in the class, the Civic is still a great competitor. A lot of stuff has struts out there. So 4th, 5th, and 6th gen were sort of in a class of their own, right? As a small car with a double wishbone front rear, it's a spectacular car. Put a big motor in it, those cars will forever be amazing. But yeah, it was a bean counter decision, like a lot of things are at these big car companies. It's sort of the way it is.
Yeah, and as far as what changed between cars, going back to that question real quick, I think some people are wondering. Some of the things that changed between the RSX and the newer cars, 8 gen and 9 gen, is that suspension geometry in the rear, right? So it's not
Right.
as soft as it was. I don't know if it was covered or not. I don't think I heard
Yeah.
that.
Well, they fixed a lot of the bump steer issue, and a lot of the geometry issue in back. And also very importantly, instead of the shock being in by the spring way inboard, they put the shock out where it was on the sixth, in previous generations. So now the shock actually has a lot more stroke. So the rear spring on a Civic on an 8th gen is in very similar position to the 7th gen. The spring's in the same place. The arm is different, the geometry is a little different, but the shock is outboard. So you're giving the shock a much better chance of controlling the car than it was when it was inboard. Inboard. So when I build shocks for a 7th gen or an RSX, I'm running huge high damping forces on it. You have to. Coney Sports are junk on that car. Most street shocks are junk on that car. From a track point of view. So I mean, luckily we can make shock, good monotube shock. I mean, I can valve and I have done for several 7th gens and RSXs, but that shock is very different from just about everything else I build.
Right.
Yeah, so the changes between the RSX and the 8th gen is the 8th gen has more caster in the front, which makes a big difference. I remember the RSX having an issue with the length of the steering arm, where once you cambered them enough, I can't remember exactly,
you had to
run out of
relocate.
the ability to tow them out, or something like that.
Yeah.
And on the back, it was a pretty big revamp. The spring's in the same location, but everything else they fixed. So the bump steer issues are mostly gone, and the shock is in the right place. And both those three things are major things. Also, there's other sort of nitpicky things like there's side loading issues on the shock too. Anyway, there's more technical issues with it.
So if you're gonna build a car and you're listening,
if you're gonna build a car that you want to put on track,
higher.
don't build an RSX.
Don't build an RSX. Sorry, Jose. You're already too late.
Build now. If you the 8th gen is a fun, great car. The 9th gen is good too. It's a little heavier. I prefer the 8th gen. The 10th gens are really interesting, actually. I mean, but they're sort of different. They're harder to get camber in the front. They got no camber bolts. On the rear of the car is sort of similar. And they have turbo engines. They're a very different animal, but they're more the 10th gen cars, it seems, from what I've noticed in results, is the 10th gen cars actually seem to be winning a lot of stock classes, street classes. So with not a whole lot of development, I guess. So they're at least as fast as the 8th and 9th gen.
Wow. At least on track. Now we have one person watching, Triple M. He's like, look, I'm not a track guy. He just bought a 9th gen sedan. This may not be in your wheelhouse, but he wants to know, like, what's a good suspension setup for someone who just not lowering too much, driving around and having
So it's a great question, and that's probably that type of question is the type of question I get most often, really. So guys wanting to do track setups, that's 10% of the people I talk to in a day. Most people are really looking for something decently comfortable. A 9th gen car is, what year is it? What year and trim is it?
2012 to 2015.
I mean, what specific year and trim is it? Because they change. The 2014 and 15 SI is especially difficult because of the front strut. Well, I'll let you ask him, and then there's not a ton of parts out there for that car. I was.
Oh, he just answered. Sorry, 2013 SI sedan.
Okay, cool. All right, that's I would say that's a good one of the 9th gen to have, so it's good for him. But still, the number of springs available, not so many. The number of shocks available, not so many. Like you can't buy a Coney Orange, which is kind of an shock, frankly. I've been selling them for a long time. They're okay, but here I go with Coney again. I am trying not to say what I should say. I'm turning into less and less of a fan of them over time. Their build quality is okay. I think they are tuned decently, but it's a twin tube shock. You're not setting the world on fire with these shocks. I mean, they're good shocks, but they have some warranty issues. They're not made in Europe like the yellows are. They're made in South America. So it's not even a Coney factory. Sorry, Coney, but you did that to yourself. And they are, if I was putting shocks on my 8th gen, I would put Coney Oranges on it. I like them. They're good. And hopefully I don't have a warranty issue with it. It's not like there's a ton of warranty issues, but generally when you think of a warranty, I had maybe one warranty issue in all the True Hearts I sold. If I sold, 100 sets of True Hearts, I had maybe one issue. The Coney, I might have had 5, that's not okay. Like your Coney, your shock should be good. You shouldn't have caps cracking off and, brackets not the right size. And like there's issues with it. But if I had an 8th gen, I'd probably use the Coney Oranges. I like the Coney Oranges. If I had a 9th gen, that's not an option. A 9th gen Civic has the sway bar bracket on the front strut. Coney never made it for that car because I think they assumed there just wasn't enough, wouldn't be enough demand for it. The good news is that the KYB GR2 dynos almost exactly like the Coney Orange. And the KYB is a better quality shock. There, I said it.
Don't worry. This channel is not big enough to get that kind of attention.
What's that?
I said this channel is not big enough to get that kind of attention. They'll have to be digging.
I feel, who I feel bad for? Nobody other than Lee Grimes, because Lee Grimes is a Coney guy, and he's a really good guy. But anyway, sorry, Lee.
All right, so Han, I'm sorry. So Han, he's down there, Signal Evolved. I don't know where he is on your screen. He had an interesting question. I didn't know this.
Okay.
So Han, please go ahead and.
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
Hans.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
How you doing?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I remember I dealt with you sometime last year with the whole sway bar thing. So I went back to your website.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. It was upside down. Yeah.
Yeah, they installed it upside down.
Yeah, right. Okay.
You do that?
It was a reputable shot too, supposedly. But I think later, soon after that, I went back to your site to look at some other suspension setup, and then your site kind of went away from selling to customers or individuals like me. I think it went towards like motorsport or something like that.
Yeah.
Whatever happened there, because someone in the 9th gen forum talked about it a little bit, but he didn't get too in depth with it. So
yeah,
was like, what happened?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So what happened is I was really want the BC thing that I'm doing. I really want it to work, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. I'm getting a huge number of requests. I mean, we have something like our build list is 35 people long now, or maybe 30 people long now or something. And we don't really even advertise. And that the strategy with the Reval BC thing is something that nobody else does or does very well. And I think it's a very, very important space for me to fill. And there's not many people that can do that and do it well. And I'm one of them. And, you know, there's 700 different BC applications. And anyway, it's something that I am very, very motivated to move toward. Okay, that said, for the first 17 years of my business, I've done the Coney ground control teen spring HFP killer kind of package thing. And that was my business. And I actually at one point decided this Reval BC thing is too important. That's where I need to focus my effort. And I had a lot of people telling me I shouldn't do that. But I did it anyway. So why did I stop? Because this BC thing was just really important. And, but you know what happened is I still started, I still got so many requests for this stuff. And I had always considered actually expanding that. And, you know, like Tire Rack does with tires, or like, there's a website that I like called eTrailer, I think eTrailer.com, that does a lot of trailer hitch stuff. There's a lot of value in somebody that can put together a suspension package offering of, you know, any spring, any shock. These are the ones that go together. These are the ones that work well. You know, sort of package things the way things make sense to me. And, you know, I have the dyno, I can do testing, I can make sure everything is right. So expanding that was one of my original interests. But in the last couple of years, as the BC thing came and grew, I really needed to focus on that. And I brought it back because I had so many people beating down my door for this stuff anyway, that I had to put it back on the site just so that I didn't spend like 10 times as long with everybody's order who wanted something. So it was kind of like, it was a reaction to staying efficient more than it was anything. I mean, I wake up with 10 ideas every morning, but what my idea actually is to take, like I already kind of have, take the Reval BC, take the Redshift name and put it toward the BC Racing Reval stuff, and focus on that, and make the, and still do the HFP killer and kit all the parts and stuff, but actually put it under a different name. Like I have this website, bestsuspension.com. Some people think it's too generic, but it's, you know, from a sort of a web marketing point of view and tied to Redshift, because they would sort of be intermingled in a way. It would be the sort of retail side, and Redshift would become the more pure sort of brand of performance that you know, that the HFP killer, it really isn't. There's you know, and I have the MCS line too. I mean, I've been an MCS dealer for a long, long time, but now we have the ability. MCS sells only shocks, right? Well, the BC Racing stuff is so good. And let me give you an example. Everybody knows ASR, right? And I'm going to pick on Charleston here for a second. ASR is a great company. You know ASR, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They made a front camber plate for the 8th gen Civic years ago, but they used a small bearing in the front, small spherical bearing, and it was terrible. So they redesigned it. They used a bigger bearing, right? Bigger bearing has survived. It's much better. The BC bearing is stronger than the new ASR bearing. That's how good the BC bearing is.
Wow.
So if you open up a BC kit and you open up a good Bilstein, like an aluminum body Bilstein kit, and you look at the two of them together, the BC kit is as good as the Bilstein kit. The BC stuff is very well built. So most of the problem people have with BC kits is how they handle, right? It's not, I mean, you can have a spherical bearing failure after a few years, you know, if you're jumping railroad tracks with it or something. I mean, spherical bearings don't last forever. but the spherical bearing in a BC kit is great. The springs are decent. You know, it's not as good as Swift springs. They have the Swift spring option. The BC kit's really, really good. And I don't know, why did I get on that? The idea of partnering with BC to bring a good, real performance, real sort of track capable coilover with all of their applications, I can now also apply to MCS. So whereas MCS only sells shocks, we can sell full MCS kits with Swift springs and any mount you want. And we do some custom stuff. Some of the BC stuff is, you know, like the way a camber plate is set up, you know, where you have the upper spring perch actually puts the spring forces into the spherical bearing. Well, BC does that with their camber plates, but they don't do it with any of their, like the Civics or Miatas and stuff, right? So if you want, you know, the best Miata kit, for example, you buy MCS shocks and maybe Vorschlag upper mounts. And the BC upper mounts don't compete with that, frankly. So we are actually designing, and we have machined upper plates that actually work with their spherical bearing that has that essentially works like their camber plates do, but puts all the spring forces into the spherical bearing as well. So little adjustments like that. But basically, whether it's, you know, height adjusters or top mounts, most of the top mounts, and springs and you know, applications, we can apply you know, all of what we can do for the BC kit in terms of customizing, we can also do with MCS shocks that we don't build here, by the way. Those are all built by MCS, and they can build anything we want to, or one of the questions we get is, do you do anything special? Is it the same thing? You know, like, do you do your own thing? No, it's the same thing as an MCS. There's no reason to change it because it's so good. Trust me on that.
Got it.
Although I'll say the MCS single adjustable is not a great fan of. They're more of a street shock. The MCS single is not as good as the BC singles that we revalve for a track car. The double adjustables right now they have are only double digressive. They're good for a lower spring rate car, not so great for a higher spring rate car like an ST or SMF car. It's the two-way remotes where they start to get really, really good for mod cars. So yeah, and we have, I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but we also have two-way adjustables. We don't use the BC external canisters. We use a different canister with that's absolutely external, that uses swivels on both ends, and a bigger canister with a better valve for the double. We've been working on doing triples. We're not quite there yet, frankly, but that's in the works too.
Got it.
But this, from what I've explained, you kind of get that the Redshift, what I'm trying to do is have a full line from, you know, $1,500 all the way to $7,000. Basically, we can provide you with the best thing at any price point, and or as good as anybody at any price point. So we're a one-stop shop for anything you could need. Everything is upgradable, you know, upgrade, downgrade, and we're, you know, we have dealers, so we're trying to expand the dealer network. So like some people out there are, you know, sell, you know, a mini kit or a Miata kit. We sell every kit. We will sell it through 100 dealers in the next year or two. And it's going to become a really serious company that has nothing to do with spring and shock kits. And so the spring and shock kits and all the parts really need to be separate.
Got it. Now we have, I'm going to say 2 more questions, and I think we're going to end it right about there. One question, we have a guy here, Johnny Tank. He has an 8th gen.
What's his name?
Johnny Tank. His actual name is Tony, but he goes by Johnny. I don't know. This thing is
Johnny
really.
Tank?
That's his YouTube thing.
Is he German? That sounds like a German last name.
No.
Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway.
Sorry.
I don't even know
Or
if
is
that's
he
his real
huge?
last
I
name.
don't know. Anyway.
All that matters. This guy ran a 10-second quarter mile on a Merc racing kit.
Yep.
With footballs in the back for
what?
Like footballs, like American footballs. So he stuffed
he's a
them into
football
this.
player.
No,
Oh.
He got footballs from Walmart, stuffed it into the rear spring, inflated them to get better squishing in the back. He's laughing. Sorry, I can see all the comments. He's just laughing here, like.
Oh, that is pure ingenuity. That is awesome.
So he got that
like
done.
Airbags, additional spring. Yeah.
He I guess he made.
Hell yeah.
Jose was with him at the track. He'll probably tell you a better story, but long story short, it's like, it's kind of like when you go to an event and you got someone who really knows what they're doing. They'll give you like a good pointer. Someone said to him, "Hey, you're squatting too much in the back, and that's why you're losing time."
Right.
They said, "Look, run to Walmart, put some footballs back there." And
wow.
I mean, like the difference was
really
huge. I mean, look, I would never do that for a road course, because that would just make me crazy.
So, is that legal? I'm thinking SCCA. Would they frown on footballs?
The SCCA would not let you do that. No.
Maybe they would. I mean, anyway, go ahead.
So to follow that up, do you ever get any requests or for drag racers?
No.
Looking to do more just straight? Okay.
Not really, no. I mean, I get a request here and there. I mean, I understand drag racing, but that's not really my forte. What I will tell you is I know basically what you're trying to do is avoid weight transfer to the back, and you're trying to keep the front tire on the ground. And I think that what I do makes a lot of sense, because again, you don't want to run a lot of rebound. Even if you have chattering on the front, if you don't want to have a lot of rebound, because you're trying to keep the tire down on the ground, right? So my thought is you should run, more compression, less rebound, so that the tire stays on the ground more. I mean, I don't even know if that is the right thing to do, but that's what I would do.
Well,
if anybody out there wants me to build shocks for him for a race car, for a drag car, I will. I'll test. I'll tune it. I don't care.
Yeah, maybe Tony's your guy.
Yeah.
So the
contact me, Tony.
Yeah. So the next question is, you actually run a sponsorship program, at least,
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like, what's that kind of process look like for?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really run a program. I mean,
sorry.
This is, my company is me and, basically my daughter, and
I like that.
Yeah.
Humble beginnings.
She has my old 07 Civic with prototype springs on it and all sorts of crazy stuff, and she drives it. She loves it, sir. She loves the car. Anyway, so she's an 8th gen Civic person too. But no, so the answer to that question is, if there is anybody out there who will who thinks they will benefit my company, I am interested in talking to them. That said, in general, I get maybe one every other week an email from somebody saying, "Hey, like, we're doing this, are you interested in sponsoring us?" It's really common. And for most people, I just say, basically, if it doesn't help me unless you are a veteran driver or a veteran engineer. Like, if you're new to this is not about like getting the Redshift name out there. I don't want your car on a show. It doesn't, you need to understand what's going on, which one of the reasons, like a guy like Brian Cool, who drives the CTSV Cadillac, who, turned fast lap at Time Trials Nationals last year on our single adjustable revalve shocks. That's a guy who's like a, multi-time national champion, very smart guy. People will listen to him. And his feedback is fantastic. So he improves the product, and he has, not just for the Cadillac, but for other things, sort of the way that we work on rear wheel drive cars has adjusted a little bit because of his feedback on being able to get on the gas early in a turn. So, yeah, so from a sponsorship point of view, I have something up there right now on the website looking for MCS, people who are interested in MCS stuff, because that's so new, and we have a couple of them only. But basically, nobody wants to run an MCS setup. There's still several $1,000, and that limits the number of people who are going to run them. And we're getting to the point where there's less need for us to do sponsorship on the Reval BC stuff, because we're actually pretty good at that right now. We also have an offer for anybody when we send you, it's written into our product. Every product that sells, every Reval product that sells is allowed one revalve in the first year. Any shock or all four shocks. Because the point is if I sell it to you at $1,500 or whatever, if there's a reason you think it should change, I will change it for you. And the reality is you could change it 5 times. I will revalve it 5 times if I think there's a good reason to revalve it, because I'm learning at the same time you're learning. Obviously, if you're trying to suggest that something needs to change and I disagree, well, we might try something, but I'm not going to do that 5 or 6 times. Go back. There's a certain point where, I don't want to just do it for the fun of it, but so in all the kits that we've sold, and we've sold a lot of them, I don't know how many, but a lot, we have one person ever who has requested a revalve, and that was
Wow.
Brian Kuehl, and only on the rear shocks. And he turned fastest lap at Time Trials Nationals on my original valving. So this was after he had run fast lap in class. So it's not like they're not good as is. I mean, there's a lot of effort that goes into these, and and it's not just the sort of calculations to valve them and hit the right forces and the right curves. It's also sort of understanding different kinds of cars, I can drive a Civic. I understand what makes a car fast. And when I have a customer, it's not just about, hey, I want to sell you these shocks. It's about, they buy, a set of coilovers for $1,500, but they get spring advice and shock advice and setup advice and how you should make the car faster, because it benefits me for them to go on track and go 5 seconds faster than they did before. And that's actually most of the guys who are changing to our setups, who can do an apples to apples comparison between their old setup and a new setup, whether it's stock and ours or a standard BC and ours, is a change of seconds per lap, not tenths of a second. It's a huge difference.
That's an eternity in racing.
Yeah. So if it really is true, if you want to go faster and you're not trying to spend a lot of money, but you also want a shock that you can adjust, we have it. And we're not just going to throw any old valving at it. I mean, we have custom shims inside that we have made, that are, cost us a lot of money. I just put a $700 order on one type of shim. So, these are special shims that produce, a curve. I don't want to get too far into it because, people can buy it, they can reverse engineer it, but they, if they don't know how to drive the car, they still aren't going to be able to repeat what I'm going to be doing. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm full of myself. I don't mean it that way, but I'm okay revealing certain things, but I want to be a little bit careful because I don't want to make it too easy for somebody to compete against me.
Right.
So that's why I talk about digressive curves and linear curves and, somebody really wants to, they could figure it out. But anyway, so to answer the question, the sponsorship, if anybody thinks that they have a reason that I would want to sponsor them, I'm all ears. But the reality is even if I don't sponsor you, I'm still gonna, our product is still gonna make you significantly faster for not a whole lot more money. And that's, there is nothing else out there that does that. I mean, even one of the kits we get compared to a lot is the Olin's Road and Track kit, and ours is still faster. And I have a couple of guys that did direct comparisons between the Olin's Road and Track and ours. And the Olin's Road and Track is really cool, but it's still a street kit. It uses sort of dynamic inertia damping and things like the Coney, what's it called? FSD, which is like an inertia valve or something. So they have relatively stiff valving, but then an inertia valve that makes it comfortable over bumps. It's very cool technology, but not faster than ours on the track. Ours is just as fast, more tunable, more, their Olin's comes with one spring rate. You can get any spring rate with ours. And frankly, our valving is more motorsports oriented. And one more thing too, by the way, yes, we have, very digressive, very aggressive valving. But when you open it up, when you open the valve, the adjustment valve up, everything kind of smooths out, and it goes from a fairly race-oriented shock to a very linear shock, both on compression and rebound. And the reality is if you put a standard BC Racing BR kit on your car, and you put one of our kits on your car with exactly the same spring rates, you probably won't be able to tell them apart. And you might even think that the ones we do are, I wouldn't say more comfortable, but you might actually like the way they feel better, because they will still have a linear, but a little bit more high speed compression. So that actually a lot of times feels a little better than high spring rates and no compression.
Got it.
Because even at full soft, it still has a little bit of compression, but in the mid and high, because it's linear.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you a reference here, I mean, the Godspeed, I talked to a guy he's tracking Streets of Willow, and he's one of my followers, and a lot of us are anxious to get either put aside enough money or be in a financial place to get your suspension, and this is not to say it's too expensive. It's just the right price, in my opinion. If anything, you could probably go higher because the proof is in the pudding. People are going faster.
So here's an interesting, you're absolutely right. The Godspeed thing, there's a lot of people running Godspeed, and the Godspeed stuff that I tested, I remember being actually pretty good. It's not as light as the BC. I think they use steel body stuff on a lot of it. Anyway, the fact of the matter though is it's still monotube and robust enough to hold up. Godspeed is infinitely better than Raceland. Raceland is junk. Godspeed is in the middle. It's still, I believe, a Chinese-made coilover. Not that I have anything against Chinese people, but most of what's made, I've been to China twice, Japan once. I've been in Europe. I kind of for production kickoff meetings and events. I kind of get what each of these. China is best at making things inexpensive. It's their forte. So like Tane with they moved a lot of their production to China, and it was able to lower the cost of some of their kits. The kits are still the same. I tested them before and after they went to China. It's dyno the same, they look the same, they feel the same. So just because it's made in China doesn't mean it's bad, right? But here's the main problem with Godspeed for me. One is the main reason for me is they're not a suspension company. And so while the shocks are probably good, there's there's little support behind them. But if you buy those and you open them up and you revalve them, you could revalve them. Absolutely. You could revalve them. They'd be good on track. There's no question about it. They'd probably be a little heavier than what we're doing. And I don't know what the piston size is in them, if it's 46 or 44, doesn't matter. There's lots of pistons out there you could make work somehow. My main problem, and the reason I didn't want to develop them, is because they're not a shock company. So you get what you get from them, and that's it. If you blow out a shock, if you damage something, how do you get another one? I don't know if they're easy to deal with. My guess is it's not so easy if you need to get another shock, for example, or if you need to replace a part on it. BC Racing has a huge warehouse. BC Racing is more like Coney used to be, frankly. And Coney isn't even as much like as Coney used to be. So BC, if you need to buy a new shock, you can just, $95 and you go and, you have it at your door in 2 days, no problem. No stress, no nothing. It's easy. Or if you need a new top plate, or if you need a new this or a new that. I mean, I can even spec different shocks in kits that I custom order. I mean, I'm lucky I have a lot of the sort of information and, valving information and whatnot that they do, and shaft sizes and shock lengths and, all sorts of crazy stuff. So, I can take an S2000 kit and I can use longer shocks to create a coilover with softer springs and at stock ride height. So you can't do that with a Godspeed. So the Godspeed is good at a budget, and you can probably do with some effort. But it's not as good from a sort of a business partnership point of view and being able to support customers on the back end, which is still important.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I only called them once. I called them before I purchased my kit, and I said, hey, do you guys offer different spring rates? The answer is no. I said, who could I call? I was getting back into the modifying scene. I was like, who could I call to replace, get a spring like yours? And they're like, we don't know.
Yeah,
I said, Ibach, maybe. So,
no, it's not Ibach.
Just like, no, so I just,
but
that was my conversation.
But I'll tell you what, I have a list of about 250 different springs between Swift and BC that if you tell me the size of your spring and the rate, I can probably replace it. Or I can give you one that's 1K higher or 1K lower.
That's what I did.
Or 5 or 10. It's one of the advantages of BC Racing is if you really want the car to handle right, you can sort of, I understand, somebody that's in a situation where you're in college or have kids or other responsibilities, believe me, I get that. But if you can afford the BC thing, it is, I think it's I know it's a better product, even though it's not a night and day difference over something like the Godspeed. But I'll say it is a significant difference.
Right.
If you look at BCs and Godspeeds next to each other and you take them apart, the steels are, I think the steel quality is not so good. The coatings are not so good. The spring is probably not as good, maybe. And their ability to kind of deal with, like, if you want different spring rates, forget it. If you have a problem, you're on your own. So yeah, it has its place. But if you buy a BC Racing kit, BR kit, and then you call me up and next year and say, I want to revalve this, I can say, okay, we can revalve it. Do you want different shock in the back? Do you want different spring rates? It's a full service kind of thing.
Right.
And by the way, we're not selling it for $5,000. We're selling it for $1,500.
Yeah.
It's relatively affordable, so, I'd love to make it less expensive, but
then it's just not worth for you. No, I get it.
It's, yeah. I mean, it takes
people
should
understand that
one of these things, and, and then I offer revalves and, warranty stuff and
right.
Yeah,
I mean, just like we spoke about in the beginning, we talked about the Merc Racing manifold and how much time, money, effort put into that, how much time Jose had to put into that, and
Yep.
you have to reward yourself in some way for all that upfront work.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
If you're a client and you're not willing to understand that, well, perhaps this is probably not the product for you. You already have me convinced. Probably sometime next year when this is my first year with this car. I'm gonna track, do a few Lime Rock events because it's pretty close to me. It's about an hour, and I got a pretty good club out here that runs with them pretty regularly.
Where are you from again?
Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
I'm literally about an hour away from there, so it's like, why have
Lime Rock?
Go to Lime Rock? So I don't know if you've heard of this SCDA. They run all over the place, but I think they started in this area, and they got a pretty good relationship with Lime Rock.
Lime Rock's fun. I like Lime Rock.
Yeah, I mean, I've already bought Swiss springs from you for my front end. I actually did buy iBox springs for the rear, even though I was like,
those are good springs too.
But they fit. So I'm like, okay, they fit. Whatever, threw them on there. But it was an increase of about, I think, see,
4K.
An increase of 4K in the rear and an increase of 2K in the front.
Is this the RSX or something different?
It's a 9th gen.
9th gen.
Oh, 9th gen. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm running Jose supercharger and all that stuff. So
yeah.
But anyway, I kind of want to start cutting it out. It's been about 2 hours. Do you guys want to add anything? And I know, look, your lights are off. Your family's telling you it's time to go. So.
Yeah, my family went to bed already. That's all right.
Yeah.
This was fun, actually.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
It's great to, I'm grateful that you made the time, and we learned a lot today, all of us. And I think anyone who's watching learned a lot. And maybe we could do this again in a while.
Yeah. Pick a specific subject and we could talk about something more in depth. Or if anybody has questions and wants me to answer them, I'm happy to do that too. But I will say as a plug, let me say one thing is my goal with Redshift is that everybody will know the name in maybe 5 years or something. It's going to become, I hope, that's the goal, that it will be a much bigger thing than it is now.
Good.
We're pushing with you. I mean, I'll slap a sticker on the car anytime I go to an event. I don't care.
I appreciate that, but I genuinely don't sell things based on just like glitz and pizzazz. The only reason this makes sense is because they work, and it's a great formula for success for anybody, that's for suspension stuff. And with some really wide reaching value,
right?
And that has some real merit to it. So beyond the Redshift sticker, it actually works. And that, I think, because it works, because people will start to realize that they can actually be fast without spending a ton of money in a way they didn't used to be able to, that we're going to replace a lot of the other cheaper stuff or similarly priced stuff for guys who are looking for really good performance or track, autocross, because those guys are not served well. They got Conies and off the shelf stuff, and then the super expensive stuff. There's not a lot in between that's a whole lot better. But what we do, if we valve ours right, they can be just as fast as a $5,000 set of of MCSs. Not that it's exactly as good. The MCSs have their adjusters. If you know what you're doing, but especially if you're just learning and you're not exactly sure where to set things and you don't have the money, we can put a set of coilovers on your car that will be seconds faster than anything else available at that price. That's the plug. I mean, and that's a very understandable value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wish you had what you have now back in the day, because I spend more than what you sell those for now, in just trying to do it with just Coney Yellows, and that was hard. So
I
very
remember
expensive.
you had the 30 series Conies on, I think, right? In the back.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think what is
that's
it?
the right shock for it, though. That was
But
smart.
still, not the same adjustability you can provide now.
Yeah, they're a pain in the, yeah, right. They're a pain.
Yeah, we get it. We totally get it.
Yeah. So
All right.
cool. And it's good to see you, Jose. I'm really glad to say hi again. It's been a long time.
Same here, sir. Really glad to see you.
Let's stay in touch.
All right, Chris.
Absolutely,
Thank you so much for being such a great guest. Taking the time to just talk with us and take us down the dark side of suspensions, or the Hogwarts of suspensions.
Well, we're building an SMF Civic now for next year, so we'll be out running that next year. It's going to be a TSX engine and a Civic for SMF. So,
where can we follow this thing? Are you posting anything anywhere?
Well, I've had the car for a long time. My friend James and we've actually traded the car back and forth. It's titled in my name, but he's had it for a long time. We're finally going to actually build it. We've finally decided now's the time. So we're plotting, and he's
there we go.
talking about when to get the car over here, because we're gonna put it over here and to start working on it. And my daughter, who turns 20 this weekend, is going to be all over that, because she's the only thing that she likes more than her 8th gen Civic is the EF Civics. And I think that has something to do with the fact that that's what I drove when she was first born. She still remembers an EF being in the back of an EF Civic, a swapped EF Civic, literally in the back seat on her booster seat, like hitting the ceiling because the suspension was so stiff. So
wow.
she was brought up right.
That's right.
Anyway, so it'll be fun. Anyway, I think we will be out and about next year. So hopefully we'll get to see all you guys.
That'd be
Hans,
great.
Hans, you're in Northern Virginia, I think, if I remember.
DC
somewhere
area.
around DC area.
Yeah.
So we'll have to get together somewhere.
Tail of the Dragon.
Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right,
by the way, I grew up in DC. I don't know if you know that. I lived in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and then near DuPont Circle. So I know DC well.
Yeah.
All right, fellas. Thank you so much.
Guys.
Thank you.
Anyone still here? There's still a few viewers. You're troopers. Thank you for being on. I'm gonna cut this up and whatever, put links on YouTube to highlight some things, because this will be after we end this will be on YouTube on my list of videos. And some people, whatever, they want to talk maybe about the football, so I'll just let you know where the football stuff is.
And if you want to clarify something, or you could send me an email if you want to, if there's something.
Thank you,
if there's
Chris.
something that comes up that you want to answer, let me know.
Some answers might take a while to come through, because I'll just email Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Barry, for setting this up.
You're welcome.
All righty.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.